going to talk about today, who's got the clicker? Oh, the power. We're going to be, Anita's going to give you an overview of, just an update of delivering the new planning system, all the phased implementation, which hopefully you've heard about through the communications we've been sending, an update on the state planning policies, which have been keeping everyone very busy. We're going to talk about, I think I've done this in the wrong order, sorry. Rhiannon's going to talk about the proposed DA framework pathways and what's just been on consultation with the regulation or the discussion paper. I'm getting everything mixed up. Tom's going to talk about the referral agencies project, and then we're going to turn over to Jason, who's going to talk about the code. And then we're going to have some question and answers. So we'll have a couple of question and answer sessions. So we'll go through it before we go to Jason. We'll open up to questions, so just write them down. Now the good news is we're going to be finished by 12, okay? Oh my God, 10 to 1, blow our brains out, we just can't do that. So with that, I'll hand over to Anita.
Thank you. What I do is generally go out of off script, so I'm going to do that like I normally do, because I wanted to speak to you a little bit first before I dive into the SPPs about where we are broadly in the program. It's been a really busy year for all of us, and I know that agencies have been really strong partners in helping us to get all of the things that we've been working with through the State Planning Commission up to ministers and some of the things up through to Cabinet. So I really appreciate a lot of the hard work that's been happening on a whole range of areas. So touching on the where we are today, we've got the state planning policies almost ready to go. So we've been working really hard with state agencies, the community and industry, as well as local government to get these state planning policies to a point where they're ready to go through the State Planning Commission next week and up to Cabinet soon after. So it's been a very important time for us to get these really important documents up through to Cabinet. The state planning policies will set the vision for South Australia in relation to the planning system. So it's very important they cover what are our state interests. So this is a very strong signal to local government and the private industry about what the state government's position is on a whole range of issues. Now what I should say that for me, these are first generation state planning policies. So this is the first attempt to work across government to pull together all the different policy positions and pull them into one document. I'm not going to promise to you that these are perfect in the first round, and in fact the Commission have said their desire is not for them to be perfect, their desire is to get them out there and happening so that people start to touch and feel and see where they are. What I think this does is provide us for a platform for ongoing improvement of our state policy positions and to get a little bit more targeted and specific over time. I think there is an opportunity for us to, as agencies in government, to start to identify the strategic issues that we need to do more work on together. And in fact, this process has really brought that out for me. Through preparing a document like this, we can't resolve all the state interests, and we can't, in a 12-month period, pull together every issue and have a strategic position around it. It's just not possible in the time frame we were given. But what we have done is set a foundation to now identify those issues that will need further work over the next few years. And I think the Commission have an intent to review the state planning policies in a couple of years. And that's important for two reasons. There's a couple of new things happening. Firstly, it's important because of what I've just said. But secondly, it's important because we are still developing the first planning and design code. And state planning policies are required by law to be in place before that first code can go out for consultation. But we know that over time, as the code gets more specific and clearer, we can get more instructive through future state planning policies about how that code is applied on the ground. But we've got a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here where we don't have a code yet, so the SPPs can't be as instructive around that as we'd like them to be. The other thing we're still working on with agencies is the spatial mapping that underpins our new planning system. So the State Planning Atlas is being prepared, and it will have all our statutory layers, i.e. the layers that have a legal role in the planning system, as well as other layers that are more advisory and therefore applicants' information to help them make decisions. It might be some warning bells for them. You should go and talk to this agency about this particular issue, or you might want to consider this problem that might come up for you around flooding or something like that. So there's these statutory layers which are really, really important, and then there's these other layers that are beneficial. So we would like to tie this mapping closer to the SPPs, and so when we have a state interest described in the state planning policies, we are able to refer to this statutory mapping set which is in Spatial Atlas. Now the Spatial Atlas hasn't been developed yet. We're still working really hard with agencies, a lot of your technical folk, on how we get that mapping better. To have a really statutory role, we need a few key things. We need a governance framework about how we manage that data. How do we make sure that data is accurate and kept up to date on a regular basis? If it has a statutory role, it needs to be signed off by ministers through the State Planning Commission. So how do we get that governance structure working so that when agencies update their data and it has a legal role, we consult on it if necessary and it goes through that process. So we've come up with a framework around some of those things for you that will help make sure that when we do that, it's accurate. So this is really, I think, important for agencies for next year, is to continue to work with us on that spatial mapping to get it right. And it will be a big focus for us. But having said that, we know that the first step mapping isn't going to be perfect. It's about getting it as good as we can get it and continuing to work to improve it. But to be in the planning system, we need commitments that we are going to do that role together. So that's sort of a really important part of the state planning policies and how they work. We also have some other really big things coming up, and Rhiannon's going to talk to you about the assessment scheme today. So we have a head power which is under the Planning Development and Infrastructure Act, which is replacing our whole Development Act, as most of you know. To make that work, you need a whole suite of regulations that tell you the detailed step-by-step guide to how you assess development applications. So that's around the process. We've got a first set of regulations out ready to go. Before setting those out, we've been really conscious of developing these things in partnership. So we have gone out with a discussion paper around the assessment scheme. This has provoked a whole lot of questions and conversations which we're now pulling together into the regulations. The regulations are really just going up to our Minister tonight, so we've got approval to draft and consult, so we won't be going back up to Cabinet with that draft, but there will be a draft going out to public consultation in February. There's lots of detail in that, and when you do look at it, and we will forward it, of course, to all the agencies, you'll find it's a big package of information. It's quite significant. It's very technical and very detailed, but we're here to help you to understand anything and deal with any questions that you have on how this might work for agencies. So that's a really important big piece of work that will be coming out for consultation in February. And Rhiannon's going to talk to you a little bit about what we've done there. The other thing that's really important out there is the accreditation scheme. So we've been setting up an accreditation scheme for professional planners and others that are decision makers in the planning system. So I believe that if you have people having a statutory role in the planning system, i.e. providing advice on development applications, that it's important that agencies start to think about whether we do accredit those people. So within DPTI, we don't have to legally accredit our team, but we're certainly going to do that as leaders of the profession within South Australia. And I think it's worth agencies looking at some of their teams who are planners and provide professional roles within the planning system, particularly as agencies will have powers of direction, i.e. you can direct an authority to make a decision to refuse an application, or you can direct conditions. To give people that if the private sector and the local government authorities need to accredit their people, I think it's great leadership from the state government if we do accredit ours. So we'll be in touch with you in the new year and start that conversation about who in your teams might be like to get accredited and how we can support you in getting that done. So that's something perhaps to put on your radar for early next year as well. The accreditation scheme will go up to Cabinet, so we're just finalising the Cabinet submission now, which will get, of course, circulated for costing and normal Cabinet process. So you should receive that either late this year or early next year as it does the rounds through the normal Cabinet process. So like I said, Marilyn, I always go off script. But look, in terms of the state planning policies, they are, we did receive over 100 community surveys on the state planning policies about the different aspects of community value. Environmental issues were high on the agenda, so that was great to see, but people are quite passionate about water sensitive urban design and green infrastructure certainly up there as people are growing and understanding, I think, of those two themes. So they almost wanted the term whistled in every line of the SPPs. We've had to resist that somewhat. We also had to deal with quite strong opposing views on a range of issues. As you would expect, we had the industry coming out pretty strong on a vision around population. And so the private sector is certainly looking to government for direction on where are we going from a population point of view. And it's not the role of the SPPs to do that, but I think in terms of government, we're all starting to get our head around what does our future population look like and what impact does that have on all of us in terms of planning for our community services and infrastructure. I think this government is clear that they are moving towards a higher growth scenario and looking to find opportunities to unlock that. So I think as government departments, we need to start turning our mind to that, because the industry are going to be pushing that extremely hard over the next 12 months. So what we have done is more adapted the SPPs in the integrated planning section to talk about supporting a higher growth population. So we're not setting targets or the ambition, but we're making sure that we're ready to respond to where the government lands on our population policy, particularly in relation to migration. So those things are really important. So you'll see some changes in the integrated planning section around that, and the Commission themselves have taken a really lead role in redrafting that section. So while we're the department that support the Commission is an independent body, independent of government, and they are making their own changes to this document as we speak. So we've done our best endeavours to share everything openly and honestly with our agencies, but as I said, Commission independent will make their own changes and put that up to the Minister as they see fit. They'll also be putting the consultation report through to the Minister with recommendations, which will then go up to Cabinet through that process. So it's also really pleasing to see that the community are getting on board with climate change. I think climate change was another area that the community was quite passionate about. The industry are interested in this too. They understand that they need to be more adaptive to climate change resilience. And of course, design quality was a big issue for people. We've got Kirstine here today. Particularly with infill growth and the changing settlement patterns of Adelaide, Greater Adelaide in particular. I think all of you are aware that we've had a change in and the question the Minister asks me regularly is, what is it that's changing people's behaviour in terms of moving to an infill growth scenario? And have we got something in our system that supports that more than fringe growth? I would argue that this is a choice. And I think the evidence is starting to support the fact that community people are looking to buy property and to live in the inner rim suburbs. And because of that, it's not something planning has created. I think the demand has been there. But what we are trying to do is frame up a better response to how that development happens. So you'll see in the state planning policies, particularly in the design quality section, a strengthening of provisions around those issues. So I think these are issues that are in front of mind to our community, which is really important. And we've had to have a mindful response to those things. So I've really dealt with most of the next steps around that, but it is a fast-track process to move that forward. So what I wanted to talk to you about following on from that is a bit about our strategy for next year, because I think this is really important for agencies to understand where we're heading. A few months ago, we started looking at how we could deliver such a massive change out there to South Australia. And what we're asking is a whole new policy regime that would be in place, as well as an e-planning solution that underpins that, a whole new assessment process. And we've got 68 councils out there that need to be trained and adapt to a new planning system. We've got a huge development industry out there. We've got all our government agencies and departments. It's the biggest change management activity planning has ever seen by a very long way, which is why I've got Mary Ellen in here to help us. And having had that experience in rolling out something probably not quite as big as this, but in Queensland, brings a lot of knowledge and experience to help us. And I can see the changes already in the way we started to operate, so thank you for that. So we've decided it's not possible to roll this all out in one big hit, so we've looked at a staged introduction. So stage one for us is really for middle of 2019. So early next year, you'll have the release of the Planning and Design Code for public consultation. That's estimated to be around February. As part of that consultation, it'll be just for the outback areas. So it's essentially the areas where there is no council, and the state government basically looks after those areas, where the planning authority or the state planning commission is the planning authority for that area. And so all our staff are the ones that do all the work and support that region. At the day that becomes operational, which we hope is the middle of 2019, that code, it'll bring into effect all the other regulations, the whole assessment scheme, everything to do with planning will become active for that region on that day. The benefit for us is that we can start to see how all the pieces of the puzzle join up together, and we've got a mindset of continuous improvement, which means that we can look at how that's working, get feedback on how that's working, and continue to improve it for the next generation or the next rollout. In late 2019, so sort of mid-2019 will be when we look at the regions and releasing a planning and design code for the regions. The regions is basically all the area outside of Greater Adelaide that's not in the outback, essentially, so it's the donut. From that time, the code will go out for consultation around July, middle of the year, soon after the first one is approved. That becomes a code amendment process for the technical people in the room. And then we go out for consultation on that, finalise that, and hoping to have that in place by the end of 2019. So we've got quite a number of councils that we'll be working with over that period of time, because it will affect, is it 30 something? I keep getting this number wrong. 42. We'll have 42 councils to work with in getting that piece of work done. So that's no mean feat. So our team will be very focused on getting out there in the regions. We've got a transition team set up, so each council has their person that they can go to help them. And we'll be looking at doing the same for agencies, to have one person established as your central point of contact. Now we're just working through with the team who that person is going to be, but once that's landed, we can announce that to you. So any questions you have on reform, you've got one person that is your person that you can go to and give you any advice that you need for the rest of the reform program. And then last of all, we've got Greater Adelaide. And we know that Greater Adelaide is probably the most complex area for the development of the code, but also for the implementation of the assessment scheme. We've got a large number of planners in the Greater Adelaide area that need to be trained, so it allows us a bit longer lead time to get that done. And for the people that are interested in the e-planning solution, we are also continuous improvement of the e-planning solution. So for that first phase one, we won't have a fully electronic code operational legally at that time. We will have a paper-based code in terms of the law, so this is the legal document, but what we will have is a draft, if you like, electronic platform that people can test, play with, go in, have a look at. We've just got our vendor on board. It's a very exciting time. The stuff that they can do in this electronic world is just amazing. It will blow your mind when you get to see it next year. You're all going to want it for all your planning documents or other documents that you have. So you can have these great, people can pretty much log in, they can make amendments, it's fully tracked, it's got great version control on everything. When the community, we put it out for consultation, people can put comments in the document, everyone can see what everyone else is saying. It's a dashboard that people can write stuff on. Like, I'm just blown away excited by this document, this e-planning solution. Not only that, but you can then ask it questions, interrogate it, and it gives you answers. It's just amazing. So in the new year, once we've got these people with the first code into the electronic platform, we'd love to bring you all back together and showcase it so that you can see how that works. It won't integrate with anything else, it'll be standalone at that point in time. As we move, and I should say that because all the development applications come into us, we'll still use our Appian system. So for Idala will still be alive at that point in time for land divisions, but we are gradually trying to overtake Idala with Appian. So a new system called Appian will replace Idala to bring all of the land division component and land use applications into one system. It's just been a bit more technical than what we would like to happen. So it won't be long, and all the referrals in that process will automatically generate out to you through the Appian system. So we will provide you all some training before July when that becomes operational to support your teams who do that referral role in doing that. Did I say anything wrong? Is that right? Yeah, good. So by the new phase 2, we will have moved all of our land division over to Appian. And so all the referrals for the regions, you'll only have to use one system except where we've got old applications. So the old applications will still sit in the data. So we've made the decision not to migrate them over. So it's a very clear, clean break between the old and the new. So the old stuff will stay in the old system, the new stuff will come into the new system. We'll have to look at what that means in the long term, but that will make it very clear for applicants that they're coming into the new system and they're using Appian. When that comes in, people will be able to lodge all their applications online through the SA planning portal. So it doesn't matter where they are, or as long as they're in the region or outback, which is where the system's switched on, they will be able to lodge all their applications there. They'll be able to track them and where their application is up to. They'll be able to see if it's been referred to an agency, and they'll see when the agency has responded. So it's a pretty accountable system for all of us, in that they will be able to track exactly how many days it's been with you, how many days it's been with us, how many days it's been with the applicant, and we can issue reports at the end of that process about where those timeframes are. This is really important for our new system because we do have deemed consents under the new system. So if agencies or us have taken too long as a planning authority, the applicant can request a deemed consent, and we just have to issue an approval. So that makes it really important that we do sit within our statutory obligations and timeframes. So when those assessment pathways come out, I encourage agencies to look at those timeframes that are in the draft regulations and look at your model of delivery and whether you can support that. Will be very important. So last of all, in the final rollout, we're going to have a fully integrated system within itself. So what that means is the application pathways or the assessment workflow will integrate with the planning and design code, which means that we'll be able to pull up the rules through the assessment pathway, and the mapping will be fully integrated with those two systems as well. So we also have a data management for technical people. We've got this data system that manages all that information and data, and that will be fully integrated in as well. So we don't have another system of recording information. All the information will be recorded through the portal. So that's really, really important. So exciting times for all of us. So I think the key thing for us and for agencies is we will support you through this change. We know that it's a big change for all of you, in that particularly those dealing in the referral space and understanding the new assessment scheme itself, understanding the new planning and design code and how that works. The rules will look different to what they look now because it is different, the system is different. So getting the right people trained up, and we'll be looking to the leaders in this room to help us work with your teams and getting the right people engaged in that process. And we will provide you plenty of time to be prepared for go live. We're going to start our countdown clock, which will be on the SA planning portal, and it will start to count down the days for the phases. So we can all see, oh my gosh, we've got 20 days to go, 10 days to go. So we should all be very clear about the day that it's coming in, and we are very determined to meet the 1st of July next year, like very determined. We're doing everything we can to get that through, and I think that's critical for our team to have a really strong focus on a date of delivery, because it's a way of getting people to focus on what really matters. And you'll see from time to time the team might have to push a few things aside that you ask for and say, we can't do that now, because nothing is getting in the way of that 1st of July date. And the reason that is there's 2 other dates that hang off of that one, and the final date is July 2020, and the Development Act switches off. And the reason, and that's in the Act. So that's a totally non-negotiable drop date, dead date. So what we need to do is keep a register of those matters that we have to push aside and continue to work on them with you over time. So I'm sorry, I've probably gone way over my time, Mary Ellen. But with that, I'll hand over to Rhiannon. Is there any questions from you guys before we go into a bit more detail on the assessment scheme? Are you clear about timeframes? Great.
independently.
So, hello everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Rhiannon Hardy. I'm the stream lead for Assessment Pathways. So I assume everyone has a basic understanding of the pathways. So you probably saw the discussion paper that was released in August this year, which gave an overview of the pathways under the Act and identified the areas that are currently under review. So, if you look here, this is a status showing where we are at the moment. So, yay, we are on track. We are in December, so we've just finished reviewing the submissions received through the discussion paper, 48 submissions in total, and we've translated those comments, messages into draft regulations, which, as Anita mentioned, will be going to the Minister very soon, aiming to release the regulations for consultation early in the new year. Now, there's no statutory requirement to consult the regulations, but we understand how important they are to the system overall. So we're consulting them, as well as some practice directions, which also support the operation of the new assessment scheme. So consulting early in the new year, practice directions being made by the Commission prior to July 2019, when the Planning and Design Code will be introduced. Very exciting times. So this is just an overview of what all the regulations and the Act is. So obviously, this big bubble, we have the PDI Act, which everyone's familiar with. At the moment, we have two sets of regulations which sit underneath the Act. So we have the general regulations and we have the transitional regulations. What we're working on at the moment, when we say assessment pathways and the assessment scheme, it's a variation to the current general regulations that are in place. So that, I think the current general regs are kind of a shell of what they will be, but the new regulations will be a few hundred pages. So it will essentially be most of the content that's in the Development Regulations 2008. So that will have, it will prescribe relevant authorities. So in what circumstances assessment managers, assessment panels, accredited professionals can act, and more importantly to the people in this room, when referrals will be undertaken, who are the referral bodies, the time frame for referral, as well as the broader assessment time frames as well. Also working on an amendment to transitional regulations, and 3 sets of separate regulations as well. So that includes fees, charges and contributions regulations, infrastructure schemes and the accredited professionals scheme. Now the accredited professionals regulations were consulted back in October and they will be made in the new year, hopefully, if they're on track. As I mentioned before, the Commission can also make practice directions and guidelines. Now there are some mandatory practice directions that are required under the Act, which are 4 of those are being consulted with the general regulations early in the new year. So practice directions set out the procedural steps under the Act and regulations. So they kind of form associated legislation, if you like. And then practice guidelines offer interpretation of matters under the Act or regs or code. And finally, we have designated instruments, which are not statutory legislation. They are designated instruments in the realm of the Commission. So we have the Planning and Design Code, state planning policies, regional plans and design standards. This diagram was from the discussion paper, which I've modified a little bit, and I'll take you through some of the key changes that we've, or some of the key initiatives that we've reached over the last couple of months as we've gone through submissions on the paper and drafted the new regulations. So there are 3 categories of development: accepted, code assessed, impact assessed. Relevant authorities for those categories of development. So accepted development does not require planning consent, so it will have no planning authority. Now, code assessed development is broken down into deemed to satisfy and performance assessed. Deemed to satisfy, the draft regulations state that accredited professionals, either at level 3 or 4, will be the relevant authority for those, as well as an assessment manager. Now, the difference between 3 and 4 is that level 4 would not have the power to assess minor variations to the deemed to satisfy criteria, whereas level 3 could assess minor departures from the deemed to satisfy criteria. Performance assessed development would be assessed by an assessment manager, assessment panel, or the commission where prescribed. So assessment manager would only be able to determine performance assessed applications where there's no public notification. Performance assessed development that's publicly notified would go to an assessment panel, and they would have the power to hear any verbal representations if they choose to. And then where I say the commission, this refers to the new Schedule 10, which is now Schedule 6 in the draft regulations, and that sets out cases where the commission is the authority, regardless of category, and includes developments that are of significance to the state. And in reviewing it, we've also removed some things in Schedule 10 which are a bit outdated, or if, for example, the new pathways would send it to the Commission for assessment in any case. We've removed any redundant clauses in there.
Sorry, is the commission a real commission or is it SCAP?
So the Commission is technically the authority, but they're required to delegate their powers as a relevant authority to SCAP, the State Commission Assessment Panel. So technically we say Commission, but it will always be SCAP. Yeah. And this is just an overview of the public notification required. So one of the key things in the regulations is actually how our application is notified. We have the new concept of a sign on the land under the Act, and the regulations will specify who's responsible for putting up that sign. So we have said that the applicant will be responsible for erecting the sign, but they can request that the authority erect the sign on their behalf on payment of a fee. Now there is also a practice direction which outlines how big the sign needs to be, where it's located, what's on it, how big the font is, and gets into quite a lot of detail about how we make sure the sign does its job effectively. So some of the key differences in the Act regarding referrals, which you're probably familiar with, but we'll just go over quickly, is that the referrals will be for direction or concurrence only. There's no longer referrals for regard. Referrals must relate to policy matters in the code. So the Governor cannot make regulations unless they relate to policies in the code that are relevant to that referral. Particular referrals may be deferred at the applicant's request, which is something we're actively considering, acknowledging that referral matters that are fundamental to a development or shouldn't be able to be deferred. And in the regulations, some of the new changes are that any request for information must be made within 10 business days of receipt of the application. Now that would apply for both relevant authorities and for referral agencies. So the receipt being the date the referral agency receives the application, for the relevant authority, the date the application is lodged. Yes?
That depends enormously on the adequacy of the information at the outset. So that's a dead certain level of information has to come in, otherwise that's going to be very difficult to achieve.
Yep, so that 10 days would allow the referral agency to review the information and make sure all that if it is needed has been provided.
The standard of information that comes in, an application has to be achieving X.
Yep, we understand that. And also talks about the interaction of the referral process with the SA planning portal. So all referrals will be transmitted via the portal, and any referral response will be transmitted through the portal and also published on the portal. And with that, I'll pass you over to Tom, who'll go into a bit more detail about the referral project. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna. Hi all, Tom Victory. I think most of you probably know me, but there's a few unfamiliar faces around the room. So as Rhiannon just stated, I'm currently working on a little mini project to do with referrals as part of the broader general regulations that will be coming out for consultation and ultimately approval for phase 1 next year. So many of you would have been dealing with Sarah Elding over the last couple of years to do with state planning policies and then to do with referrals. I guess your work through estate planning policy has probably touched upon referrals and then sort of toing and froing between the two for a good sort of year or two. And I guess we're now getting into the real pointy end of trying to land what are the exact referrals. I guess there's a bit of a focus right now on getting the referrals nailed just for phase 1. We've got our government architect colleagues in the room. Obviously, government architect referrals don't apply to phase 1. So there's probably less of urgency for something like that to be sorted over the next month or two, but ultimately, that's, I guess, we'll be looking at a staged approach moving forward. As Anita was saying, it's really, what is critical right now to sort out and what isn't, and we'll be, addressing things accordingly. So apologies to pull up some parts of the PDI Act on a 40-degree Friday, but we're going to have to anyway. Thought it was good just to have a quick refresher. Rhiannon sort of alluded to a couple of these points before, but some of the next slides is probably just important to refresh on what the exact parts of the PDI Act are that are of importance to this little project that we're working on. So 122 is the main bit about referrals. So there's the first clause up the top there. Really is just setting out that the regulations may provide that there is prescribed bodies and that a referral will exist to those bodies. Nothing really new there. But then getting down to this next clause here, these are some sort of new parts of the PDI Act that we're not really used to under the Development Act. So the Governor must not prescribe a body other than the Commission, under subsection 1A, blah, 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 unless the Governor is satisfied the provisions about the policy or policies of the body will seek to apply in connection with the operation of this section have been included in the PED Code. Obviously, it's also recognising that a policy may not apply in all cases. A lot of the referrals are about very specific or scientific things, technical things, which might not be able to put specifically into a planning policy as such. But as we can imagine, there's also a lot of sort of broad general policies that live in development plans and what will be in the new code, which could probably cover more or less some of the things that referral bodies look at when they receive referral. There's also a little out clause that, when the Minister has indicated that the Minister is satisfied that a policy envisaged by the first paragraph is not necessary or not appropriate. So there is a little out clause that some policies just won't be necessary for a particular referral. But it is a particular important thing to note. And I guess as we're drafting the Planning Design Code, what we're looking at is putting in some sort of schedule or table in the front part of the code, which will set out all the prescribed referral bodies, and then what the actual policies are in the PED Code alongside each one of those referral bodies. So that really sets out what the referral is, who it's to go to, and then what the key policies are. So when you receive a referral, it's very important to know that that the referral response should really be based upon those policies, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail in just a minute. But also noting that there is a little out clause, so it's not quite as neat as I'm saying, but it's where reasonable those policies will apply. The last bit here is just talking about so a prescribed body acting under this section is only to deal with the matter or matters for which a referral is made to the extent that is relevant to the purpose of the referral, and so as to only consider matters that are within the relevant field of expertise or operation. So again, that's something that typically does happen in practice at the moment, but the Development Act doesn't necessarily really hone in on this point at the moment, where the PDI Act really does hone in on that, and that where a referral does happen, it really comes down to what are the policies in the code that apply to that referral, but also what's the key purpose of the referral, and what are the key matters or matters that are in the field of that particular body's expertise. So I thought it was just important just to set some of those ground rules of the new Act in place. That's the parameters that we're all working within. Before I go on to the next slide. So given, I guess, some of those parameters in the new Act, we felt it was necessary just to come up with some guiding principles for us to refer to, but also yourselves to refer to as we work together over the next month or two to really try and land what the new referrals are. There's a whole new bunch of things in the Act here. It's not just that those parts of the Act are referred to, but it's also, we've got e-planning coming on board and a whole bunch of new things which is different to the current system. So we kind of need to consider all these new aspects when we're landing what a referral could look like. So just to quickly go through guiding principles. So typically referrals shouldn't be established. They can instead be effectively addressed through code policy. Now, there's already been a number of discussions with various agencies over the last year or two about, is there policy that's particularly of interest to your particular agency that could go into the code? And can we get those code policies to such a point where you don't necessarily need to see a referral, or you might not want to see a referral if you're confident that there's enough policy in the code to deal with it. So that's always, I guess, a bit of an end game is, if we can avoid unnecessary referrals and agencies are generally happy with that approach, then why not draft some policies accordingly? So moving on, referrals should only be established where they require specialist technical, scientific or other expert assessment, which links back to that bit of the Act. Referrals should be able to be fit within the e-planning framework. Because we want to really make things automated as much as possible, is the real end game of the new e-planning system. So I guess we're trying to, where we can, take out some of the vagaries that exist with our current referral triggers at the moment, where it might rely on a qualitative or a call made by a planner as to whether something's minor or not minor, or so taking some of that guesswork out of it and really saying this type of land use on this particular block in this part of the state requires a referral, and if it's not that, then it doesn't require a referral. And so it's not going to be entirely easy to do that with every single nuance of all these referrals, but it is a principle that we're trying to strive to wherever possible. So another one which doesn't really happen at the moment is that we've got this new deemed to satisfy criteria, which are essentially kind of like compliant development criteria as we know it today. So again, if we can set up deemed to satisfy criteria in the code, where if an applicant comes along, proposes the development, it ticks all those boxes, and where those particular boxes or criteria are relevant to the referral, then perhaps a referral is not required. So that's when we're looking, we have been working with yourselves, but also looking to work a lot more moving forward as to, can we confidently create a bunch of tick box sort of measurable things that, if you're happy for these to go into the code, and if they're all met, then you won't receive a referral. So again, that's ultimately an end game for a lot of these referrals, but it's going to be very, very tricky, and perhaps in this first round, we might just not be able to come up with enough criteria for that to happen, but the framework we're looking at developing, a lot of the referral triggers will have this leading statement of, except where all relevant deemed to satisfy criteria are met, then a referral is required. So it will just come down to whether there are or aren't those criteria available in the code. So another one, a new referral should be avoided unless there's a clear need to establish it based on significant problems in the current system. That's just missing. So we're mainly looking at how we're going to transition over existing referrals to the new system, but there's also potential for one or a couple of new referrals to come into the system. And that's only where there's a real need, a real urgency, a real shortfall in the current system. Spatial-based referrals need to be able to be clearly and practically mapped or overlays in the code. So again, a new thing that we're looking at is we're trying to make the code a real one-stop shop where, as you know, at the moment we have various GRO maps, general registry office maps of, prescribed water areas, or this area of the state or that area of the state. They will sit in obscure parts of government and archives, and a lot of them on GIS layers, but not always. What we're trying to do is bring all that stuff all together into the new millennium, and create GIS layers for all these spatial areas of the state, and then map them via overlays in the code. And then eventually, the state planning atlas you'll be able to click on these layers. So what we currently know is a GRO map might now be a GIS layer. So trying to make it a lot easier to follow. But along with that, if we're going to be mapping such things, we need to keep in mind that as these things might change regularly over time, then it needs to be practical for us to be able to keep updating it. So something like a native vegetation map might be tricky in that regard. That native vegetation could be removed over time, and then you have to keep continually updating maps and so forth. So we just need to have a bit of think about those sorts of things. Ben, question?
I've probably asked this before. Does that mean that the referrals must be able to be shown on an overlay?
No. So some will.
Of
Some will, some won't. So there will be statewide referrals, like we have at the moment, which they don't apply to a particular part of the state, they just apply to the whole state.
types.
Yeah, so for types of development, and the EPA referrals are a good example of them, where it comes down to a particular type of industry, or a landfill, or whatever it might be, which just requires a referral across the whole state. So we're having a bit of thinking about how we might best put that into the code, where you could have a statewide overlay, or you could just have a schedule in the code which says here are the statewide referrals, or perhaps you can even list them in every single zone. So we're just working through what the best way to put that in the code is. But yeah, a lot of overlays are just related to policy and won't have any referral triggers in them at all, whereas a lot of other overlays will. So referrals linked to the need to obtain a licence or other approval under another act, they'll be given a bit of a higher weighting in all of this. Typically a lot of those referrals are currently for direction, for good reason. That makes sense. If you're going to need some sort of licence after you get your DA approved, then it probably makes sense for that referral agency to have a power of direction during the DA, so that's not cause frustration and unnecessary work for an applicant to get all the way to the end of the process and then have it all vetoed by the ultimate licence right at the end, the last hurdle. So they're all the key, guiding principles. And probably one I failed to put in here really is state planning policies as well. So while we're considering all of this, we also need to consider how they link back to state planning policies, which ultimately should guide our whole planning system, and in particular what the state interests of agencies are. So I actually might add an eighth one in there.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Back to the previous slide.
Yep.
How do you reconcile dot point 3 and dot point 4 in terms of having an automated referral, but then having to assess deemed to satisfy criteria to determine if a referral is required? And then your accredited professionals are linked to that, so you need a level 3 or 4 accredited professional to make that determination, but your system is going to do that for you? Yeah,
it's a very good question, and like I was saying, that our end game is to make referrals automated where we can, acknowledging it's not going to work in every single nuance, in every single situation.
Not to go into the detail, but I think really what we're saying here is that it will trigger a flag that a referral might be required. And so it's clear enough to say a referral might be required. It's always the role of the authority to determine that a referral is required. So it will flag up to the applicant that it's likely that one is required. The authority looks at it, goes, yes it is, because it doesn't meet the deemed to satisfy, and then it's the authority presses the button in your planning, which sends it off to you. So that's how I think it will work in practical terms.
Yeah, okay, cool, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's right, and I guess the alternative, if there's only sort of 2 DTS criteria that relate, well, when the relevant authority gets the application, they might be able to quickly do those 2 ticks and then go, a referral's not required. So yeah, there is some nuances to it, and I guess the heritage referrals might be a good example where what we're looking at is, the E-plan system will just pick up various allotments, so that if you've got a state heritage place at one allotment, and then there's a DA proposed on the allotment next door, then the e-planning system will flag that this allotment next door could be subject to a heritage referral. Then it goes off to the relevant authority. They will then perhaps look at the site plan, where's the actual new building being proposed, how far is that from the actual state heritage place next door, and if there's a particular sort of buffer area and they're proposing development outside of that, then a referral might not be required. But the e-planning system has flagged that this allotment could be subject to a referral. So what we're looking at, again, the way we know referrals, I guess in Schedule 8 of legislation at the moment will be a bit different in the new system too, because the referral, I guess, framework and referral triggers will be split between regulations and the code itself. So I'll just show you a couple of quick examples of what we're thinking in terms of setting out the new framework. So we've got a snapshot here of what a new table could look like in the development regulations, or the general regulations. So new Schedule 10, which will replace Schedule 8 as we know it. So I've got an example here of really this table sets out what the framework is in terms of what the referral is, what the actual prescribed body is, and then what the purpose of the referral is. I'll chat about that in a minute. And then what the powers of the referral body are when they receive the referral, and then the period of time that the body gets to make their assessment. So in this case, we've got an example of the Country Fire Service referral. So it's just setting out what the referral is. Development of bushfire protection areas is the nature of the referral. Then it goes on, types of development as specified as being subject to a referral in a zone or area identified on the P&D code for the purposes of this clause. So it refers to the P&D code, so we can go over the code, and the code will then tell you what the exact triggers are. Then the rest of the table just sets out what are the governing rules that's behind the referral, so who it is. So then the purpose of referral, so that's something we'll want to work together with you over the next few weeks, month or so, is to set out, I guess a lot of you might work to a particular charter at your agency, or you might have some overarching head powers that you work to when you receive referrals. So I guess it's working out what are your legislative things that you work to when you receive a referral, and if not that, what do you see as being the key purpose of your referral responses? So in this case, an example could be this, the CFS, when they get a referral, is to assess, to make an expert technical assessment of the risk to life and property in relation to proposed development being established at that proposed location. And there might be a few other dot points about perhaps considering how it impacts on bench removal with bushfire clearances and a few other things. So that gets back to that particular clause of the Act that talks about what is the purpose of the referral, what's the expertise, what's the technical assessment going to do. And then the rest is probably pretty clear, power of direction on conditions. And
Just a little bit of context of why we've done this is in terms of the purpose, this is going to be really important now that you're going to be going to court on your applications. So if you're in this system and you've got powers of direction, you're now going to court to defend your advice if there's a challenge. So previously when you just gave advice, if the authority took it on, they defended your position in court. Very nice of them. That's gone. So now if you provide your advice, you need to be really clear about your mandate to provide it. It needs to be in the scope of the purpose of referral, and then you need to defend that position in the courts. So getting this purpose right, I can't stress enough, is really critical for you because it tells you what your scope is. And if you're operating outside of that scope, that application is open to challenge on that basis through either judicial review or third-party appeals. So we have set up the system to minimise appeals. So you'll see that most applications no longer have third-party appeal rights unless they're restricted. So third-party appeals is lower, definitely in the new system, so you're not as exposed if we had done that in this current day system, but you still are particularly in restricted or judicial process. So judicial process is if you haven't followed due process in assessment of that application. So if an agency's worked outside of their scope of their referral, that's a definite question of judicial review. And you'll be open to that challenge, and your agency will need to defend its position. And I can't stress that enough. It's really critical that we get that bit right, and that's why that bit is in the regulation. Whereas the code makes sense that the technical detail is in, so this almost sets the scope also for the code. So we wouldn't, when we're writing the code policy or the commissioners, they will have to have regard to the scope and make sure that the land uses that they capture in the code itself align with that scope. So the government will set that scope, and then the commission will do the detailed work underneath it of the precise land uses that get referred. Of course, in consultation with agencies, and the commission is, of course, open to work with all the government agencies in getting that right. But I think that's the really critical message I would like to leave you with, is we need to get this right. It's in the regs. It will go through the cabinet process, of course, in the normal way, because it is the making of regulations. So we've got a bit of time to work through this, because we won't put the regs up straight away. We're actually going to put more out like this for consultation, and then have the detail in the draft code. We won't put the formal regs up until they're ready, which is more like getting them in place for July, just for the outback. So I just wanted to cut, sorry Tom, just dive in there. But it also goes back to what the government was doing when they wrote the PTI Act, in principle is, and you all know this I think, is to cut red tape. That was the whole focus of the new PTI Act. Put the effort into the matters where the effort needs to go, whether that's from government agencies' perspective, or an authority's perspective, or an applicant's perspective. Don't waste time on stuff that we shouldn't be wasting time on because it costs money. For all of us, I mean, as an agency doing a referral, it costs money to run your teams that provide those referrals. So working out what you actually need to have a say in versus what you don't. And it's always the hard part in a process of reform is not to get risk averse with this change. It's a bit of, if there is a chance to, if we don't get it right 100% the first time, we can still go back and tweak it. I really ask you guys not to get conservative on this and go for the one application that might come in 10 years' time. Try and look at, we're trying to capture here the 80-20 rule, the 80% of applications, or the high-risk things. If it's a low risk to government, let it go, is my advice to you. It's what we're trying to do as well, and it's a hard journey for the team to get there. We're planners, we look at detail. A lot of us have technical people who look at detail. You've got to find a way to lift them up, or they're going to get themselves caught in red tape. And what that means is you're wasting your time on shit that doesn't matter. Sorry, pause the video.
What's the live stream?
But I can't say this enough to you. As leaders in the profession, in your agency, we've got to find a way to get people to lift it up and look at the stuff that really matters to this government. What matters to this government? What's at risk to life and property? What causes us huge grief from a state government perspective? Local issues, local authority. State issues, state authority. So really when you're thinking about providing advice, you think about your resources to manage it. We're looking at the fees and charges review, but I can tell you it will never be going to 100% cost recovery. So take that out of your minds. The government has never done cost recovery. No government has ever done cost recovery on planning. The fees would be too high. We do this for the greater community good. And that's the role of government. So if you think we're going to get full cost recovery, it's not going to happen. So think about what your agency can deliver and be really practical in thinking around this. So that would be my message to you. We're doing the same. What does our SCAP, State Commission Assessment Authority, really have to look at? Is it really of state interest? And we'll be culling a lot out of that list and putting it back to local government. The other thing that's really important is with the regions, a lot of them are looking to set up joint planning boards, which means they'll be looking at assessment regionally. So they will elevate their expertise. And so there is further opportunities for us to delegate these sorts of decisions to boards if we are of a mind to do that. So it's something to keep in mind too. In the longer term, we'll keep you in the loop on that. But you might have a referral to your agency that you're willing to delegate to a joint planning board, particularly if they've got the right level of expertise. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're working through this. So Odie, back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Jenna. Very well said. That's a very good segue, actually, to my next slide. So thanks for that.
Can't help myself.
So yeah, I need to touch upon the thing of trying to cut red tape and really focus in on what the key things we're actually interested in from the state perspective. A lot of the current referrals in the development regulations are, I guess, worded in a negative fashion in that it's every type of development except a couple of things. So you basically see everything, and so you might get 500 referrals a year. 480, you just say, no comment, we're not really interested in these. The other 20, you go, oh shit, these are actually very important, big things, I spend a lot of time on them. So another real guiding principle looking at here is trying to flip around any of those negatively worded ones into a positive fashion. And so, for example, the Country Fire Service, one we're looking at the moment is a good example of that. And so he's working through, so except where deemed to satisfy criteria, blah, 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 are met. So that's that leading statement which we're talking about. The following types of development within a high bushfire risk area, and actually listing what are the key things that are of interest to the state government and need a technical assessment for a very good reason. We're talking things, creating additional development opportunities in high bushfire risk areas through land divisions, dwellings, tourist accommodation. They all speak for themselves, obviously preschools, nursing homes, hospitals, and high bushfire risk areas, critically important. Someone doing a little 5% extension to the house in a high bushfire risk area, not that important, don't need to see it. So it's really just honing in on that, and then in conjunction with those other things on the previous slide about what is the purpose of the referral, CFS gets a response, they do a technical assessment just on matters to do with life and property, safety. They're not going to look at the reflectivity of the roof of the dwelling, it's just their technical expertise. So that's the sort of framework which we're trying to achieve. We might not be able to achieve on every single one, we acknowledge that, but our starting point is always to go to this sort of framework, and we'll just work together with you. These lists might end up having to be quite extensive and long, that's fine. A lot of the stuff will just sit in an e-planning sort of database, so you won't really need to even see these lists. You'll just, when you go to lodge it down, a particular block, e-planning will just tell you, yes, you've triggered one of these land uses, it could be subject to referral, or it is subject to referral, and away you go. So there's a number of reasons why we're doing that positive thing. It's to do with e-planning, but also minimising red tape and all those things combined. So yeah, just to give a heads up, that's what we're looking at. And so the next few weeks, we're going to come out, and what we'll probably do is put forth what we think our proposed framework is, based on all the discussions we've already had with you the last couple of years. We've got various written responses from you already. So we'll just outline what we think is a good way to go as a starting point, and work through perhaps what this particular dot point land uses are and so forth. So that'll be up until really Christmas. We're going to try and land most of the stuff that we can before Christmas. Some might go into early Jan, so be it. But we're really need to wrap these referrals up by the end of January, the very latest, to really get into that first consultation for phase 1 of the code. So the code will come out with these referrals in it for consultation. And then that referral framework needs to go into the general regulations by middle of 2019, because that's when the phase 1 code will be switched on along with regs. So that's what we have in front of us. And so thanks for your time, just hearing all that today. I don't think we've got any questions now, or we can address a few later on. I think we're going to have a little bit of a panel session later on, so we can do it then if you like.
Okay, we'll hand over to Jason Bailey, who I'm sure a lot of you know, to talk about the P&D code, and then we'll have some questions at the end. So we're still shooting for a 12 o'clock finish.
We will make it.
We will make it. Because we are You're right. Do you want me to ditch some stuff?
Please.
Yes. Killed a few trees today, don't we?
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Yes, I am Jason Bailey, leader of the Planning Design Code team. You've all been provided a working draft of our Planning Design Code for the Outback for phase 1 of our implementation strategy.
People keep saying Outback.
Yeah. Say that again.
People keep saying Outback. It might be helpful to...
I will. To describe it.
Yes.
Define it. I will. It is part of my presentation, and I like talking about that. That's an easy part of the presentation. You in fact. But yeah, you have all been provided a working draft of it. I wonder, have you had a chance to have a look at it? And, yeah.
Oh,
I love it.
That's beautiful.
We'll meet afterwards.
We have
I went to
to. We
Christmas
will.
party afterwards, but
Yeah.
So do we.
Awesome.
I just want to, I went there straight up because I wanted to impress upon you the fact that it is a working draft. It's very much a working draft. Those of you that have had a chance to look at it, you'll note there's some really sort of important gaps, which in some cases have been left purposefully, because we need to continue discussions with you about those and come to an agreement or a landing on the subjects that they relate to. But anyway, I am getting ahead of myself, and now I'll go to Peter's point very quickly about this Phase 1 code, this code for the outback or out of council areas, land not within a council area, all sorts of different ways to describe it. The outback, as we know it, or land not within a council area, it's broadly all of the land to the north of Goyder's line, with some exceptions. There's some land beside Whyalla. There's a little island in the middle of Eyre Peninsula. Anyway, a bit too much detail. It's, for the most part, the really arid parts of the state. But it does include state waters. Sorry.
The really wet parts.
And the really wet parts. But salty wet.
American salty.
Thank you, Tom. There's a bit of that in there too. It's a big area, all that sort of stuff. As was mentioned earlier by Anita, there is no planning authority beside the State Commission Assessment Panel for that area. There's no council to assess applications in this area. So the State's Assessment Panel is the planning authority for development in these areas. I just want to quickly touch on the fact that I think might be reiterating something Anita said. There isn't a lot of development that occurs in these areas. There's like 50 odd applications per year proposed in these areas. And most of those aren't very complex kinds of development. And it's for that reason that this area was chosen as the first area to develop a code for and to apply and enact, get operational our new planning system with all of the change that entails. It's a bit low risk. It provides a pilot, a testing environment, a live testing environment. All that being said though, there are some important and sensitive environments in these areas. The coast is a long coastline within it. There are the coastal waters themselves. There's a part of the River Murray and the floodplain. There are townships, there's state heritage, as some of you would know, there's some state heritage areas and state heritage places within these areas. So the area provides a good testing ground with the low risk, but with some complexity that's going to yield good experience to help us refine and make better the code and the system generally. So coming back to the code and where we're at on it, that working draft that we provided to you, even though there are some important and significant gaps in it, referrals for one, and some others that I won't dwell on right now, we're getting close to completing it for the Commission's consideration. The Commission, in fact, is considering a draft of that code that we provided you that's tracked on a bit more, that's further refined, got some more detail in it. They're considering it next Thursday. They won't be endorsing it at all for release to the community early next year. We hope to get that from them early in the calendar year, in January to be specific. Within that, I guess, is a point, implicit point, that is we really are keen to work with you furiously over coming weeks and early next year to get a landing point, to get an agreement on some of the matters that you're interested in. Not to say it's the only time, the only opportunity we have to do this, and that's where I go back on. The fact that this is phase 1 of the code, and that there will be there are going to be 3 phases of it, 3 versions of it before it comes together, or before it's completed for the whole of the state. If I can, very quickly, just remind you, first phase, Outback, talked about that. Second phase, regional South Australia, 42 council areas. Third phase, Greater Adelaide. And I might actually make an important point, like this implementation approach allows us, we develop a pilot code for the Outback. We augment it to include policy content that works for regional South Australia that isn't in the Outback code. I really am jumping ahead, but think some of the zones that are within, for instance, the pack that you provided, well, they're not all the zones that are needed for regional South Australia. I'll get to that in some more detail as I go forward. But when we augment this code for regional South Australia, we'll have an opportunity to come back on what we've got working for this code to perfect it, refine it. Then when we do that again for Greater Adelaide, bring more zones in, a lot more zones, a number of more overlays, more general module content, we'll have an opportunity to come back on this and this. That's the next 18 months for us. Some people, I've actually been surprised when I've talked about this with people that they haven't understood that really key fact that I've just tried to articulate, that there's opportunity to come back on what we create for the Outback over the next number of weeks and in the lead up to mid next year when we make the Outback code operational and when we turn on the new planning system for the Outback. I hope that is clear to people. There's some comfort in it.
Just quickly, Jason, the thinking behind including Mid-Murray in Greater Adelaide, and Phil Hazel's just pointed out Yankalilla in phase 2. Not Greater Adelaide.
So part of the rationale here was the councils that don't have any e-planning solution. So if they have any planning solution, we've put them into a later phase to enable them time to adapt their existing solution and do any integration points.
Okay.
So that's more of a technical reason
All right.
for that.
I'm just wondering how treating River, Mid-Murray's going to have a River Murray dimension to it that'll also be applicable to phase 2, that I guess it'll be worked out.
You would have seen there's River Murray in phase 1.
Yeah, well, yes.
And I think this is a good thing, what you've just identified, because of that refinement ability. There will always be an ability to refine the code, like forever, for as long as it is the code. It's going to be a live document, of course. We all understand that. The code that when we complete the code for the whole of South Australia, it doesn't sit statically forever, of course. Yeah. Okay, I'll track on. What we sent you, and our first version of the code, the primary policy source for it was and is the South Australian Planning Policy Library. We didn't begin writing the code in a vacuum, reinventing all policy that's needed across all of South Australia for all the great diversity of development that occurs in this state. We didn't start in a vacuum from scratch. We had to start from some reference point, and the South Australian Planning Policy Library was it. A really key reason or part of that rationale was that all of the negotiation, all of the discussion that occurred between State Planning Agency, Planning SA I think it was at the time, and agencies, other agencies, about what should be planning policy, we didn't want to abandon that. We wanted to sort of bring that over, even though, as just having a conversation with Belinda and Matt on aquaculture and fisheries and such things, even though there's been quite some movement since the South Australian Planning Policy Library was last updated. It was last updated in 2010. It's a bit long in the tooth, but still, all of the negotiations and the hard work that went into developing that, we didn't want to waste it. We had to start from a reference point. Couldn't pick on one particular development plan, applying to one council area for that purpose. There is no development plan for one council area that covers and has within it all of the policy needed for the rest of the state. So it's a really important point that we launched off the South Australian Planning Policy Library. When it comes to the outback, of course we've considered the development plans that apply to the outback. In particular, 3 of the 4. I should have mentioned earlier when I talked about the outback and the outer council areas, our first phase doesn't cover metro coastal waters. The state waters, sort of within Gulf St Vincent, they logically sit with phase 3 for Greater Adelaide. But coming back to the line, we used and we've had a lot of regard for the 3 land not within a council area development plans that apply to the outback or the part of the outer council areas of the state that are subject to our first implementation phase, being land not within a council area Flinders, land not within a council area Far North, Riverland, Eyre and Whyalla, and land not within a council area coastal waters. Those 3 development plans have helped us in particular with zones, what zones we should have applying to the outback. They haven't helped us many other ways because they're really quite thin, those development plans. It's a fact, they haven't been the subject of policy reform, investment and energy from the state. Probably because there hasn't been a great need for it, but yeah, just touch on that fact. Coming back to the draft code, the working draft which has been provided to you, pivotal directions that have informed how that's taken shape are the fact that the Act says that the code must comprise and will comprise, its policies will take the form of performance outcomes and deemed to satisfy criteria. And secondly, the fact that we're going digital and we're going to have an e-planning system. And I'm going to talk about those 2 things just a bit. By way of reminder, I'm sorry you've perhaps heard this a bit, but it's important to touch on it again. The Act says planning policy in the code in the future will comprise performance outcomes and deemed to satisfy criteria. Performance outcomes are, as their name might suggest, they're a description of an outcome that must be achieved. What's important about a performance outcome is it's not telling any of us how that outcome is going to be achieved. It's leaving that open. It's just describing the outcome that needs to be achieved. This is a hypothetical example. Buildings of a low-rise scale, I don't like that, but that complement the surrounding residential built form and local character. That's an outcome. Deemed to satisfy criteria, on the other hand, are a way of meeting the outcome. And they must be absolute, black and white, emphatic. Hypothetical example relating to this, your building doesn't go over 9 metres in height. Key point, every policy matter that the code deals with will have a performance outcome. It won't necessarily have a deemed to satisfy criteria. Sometimes we can't come up with these for the performance outcome in mind. I think about some environmental outcomes. You can't codify that for some of those. So that's a pivotal driving direction given us by the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act. The code will have these, and therefore what we've sent you and what we'll continue to work with will take that form, that shape. Need to touch on, and perhaps it was implicit in what I was saying, there's a relationship between these, and that's why we've set that code up in that column way, which is a bit like the building code, for those of you that know it. A lot of, I think, policy instruments have gone that way. So, yeah, that's why it looks the way it looks. Secondly, sorry, I think I might have, something's going on with my presentation. On e-planning, e-planning is central, pivotal driving direction that's informed the way that that document has taken shape. The way that that drives things largely is how we've structured policy, and this move to have headings and clump policy up in a way, to be a bit crude about it. That's really important for a digital planning solution to work, because we want to, it's going to get a bit tricky and messy potentially, this connection of policy to the two development types. And this business of preloading what policy is relevant to a development type and what's not. That's an inherent feature of what we've sent you. And I'll come to that as I go on. This slide here, what I want to go to here is that existing policy in the South Australian Planning Policy Library and in development plans for that matter, is really, we see, an amalgam of performance outcomes and deemed to satisfy criteria. I know what went wrong with my presentation. I actually went to expand on this in relation to performance outcomes and deemed to satisfy criteria. A lot of existing policy, it's an amalgam. I look at this one as an example. This is a policy, as you can see, it comes from the land not within a council area, one of the land not within a council area development plans. It's trying to do two things. It's, on the one hand, it's saying broadly and generally, allotments should be of a certain size to fit in or be consistent with character, I see, and it's providing a deemed to satisfy dimension in the form of a number, not only to provide guidance about how you fit in, how allotments will fit in and be consistent with character, but also to meet an environmental outcome.
Jason, how does that relate to an approval under another act or another regulation administered by another body? Because that's one of the challenges that we have with development and wastewater management.
Yeah. This is historic. Where I think we need to go in the future on this stuff is ensure that our policy is aligned with and in harmony, for want of a better way to put it, with other legislation. It's going to be a fact that planning overlaps with other, I think, not legislation, but other outcomes. If planning will do the work, some of the work that other agencies perhaps are ultimately responsible for. This being an example, perhaps, Phil?
I guess it needs to be an integrated decision. It's one decision and it should involve all of those things. It shouldn't just be a decision here and a decision there. Anyway.
That sounds like the Holy Grail.
Well, I keep arguing it for decades. Anyway.
Yeah.
If I could maybe just sort of jump in on an example, that could be a deemed to satisfy type provision in that if you've got an approval for a community wastewater system, you can lodge it with the DA and then you can tick off that deemed to satisfy criteria. If you haven't got an approval yet, then you default into the performance assessed category, and an authority could potentially refuse the DA based on, that's quite an integral part of the DA having waste approval system. So that could warrant refusal.
It should be an integrated decision.
Yeah, and
What do you mean? Can you tell me more about what you mean?
Your dwelling and your wastewater system need to be decided together.
In terms of the licensing and...
No, just it makes sense from a planning point of view to make sure that that dwelling has got an appropriately sited and designed wastewater system. And often applicants get their wastewater system approval separately and then they might apply for a dwelling. So it doesn't make sense. They have to be a total integrated decision.
Probably some of it's operational, isn't it? Some of it's a point-in-time decision.
Some of it is, but what we find, Michelle Woodhouse from Wastewater Management at ASA Health, what we find is unless, sometimes there is no way to achieve, even like, this is a bit of a different scenario, 1,200 square metres in the outback area, generally should be able to provide enough land to install some sort of approved on-site waste